won't be able to see this from where you're sitting, but I was sitting there, and this all began 50 years ago. This is a picture of my mother and father as my dad's a lieutenant and my mother is a young bride in Manila Bay in the late 1945. My father was on Okinawa right at the end of the war. My mother's here. They'd been married right before he left, and no children or anything. I'm the first in 50. I'm the 51 model, and she says, "Well, what the heck? Why don't I head over there?" Well, you couldn't get transportation, so she figured out she would hitchhike on mail trucks from here to San Francisco. So she got on mail trucks, she got to San Francisco, she got to the dock, and they were boarding a whole bunch of nurses and support people, so she just walked on with them. She arrives in Okinawa, and my father goes, "What in the world are you doing here?" She says, "Well, I've decided to come over and be here." There were 2 Quonset huts, and they're still there at Naha on the at the end of the peninsula, 2 Quonset huts. I think the Marines have got that area now, and they cleared them out, and one lieutenant moved to the other one, and my dad was head of supply as a lieutenant, if you can imagine that, because they were just downsizing tremendously, and they moved into there. And so a reason I say 50 years ago is this topic. Around the table, if there was a question, my dad was a big history buff, was always talking about MacArthur, the Incheon landing, Bataan, and my mother would always say, "I remember sailing out of Manila Bay and all the sunken ships and all the debris and all the damage," because they'd gone into Manila and they were going to Tokyo at that time. And so today I want to talk about a book that looks at the impact on and the contribution of 89 Texas Aggies that were involved in the Bataan and Corregidor fight. This is my out.
How many of them lived, sir?
Only a third of them came back. Less than a third, about 30. He asked how many lived. So my outline is the following: FDR, Pearl, Clark, Bataan, Doug, Rock, the March, Hail Ships, and VJ. So that's the advance warning of what we're going to talk about. In 1937, after fishing in a destroyer off the coast of in the Gulf of Mexico, Roosevelt got on a train in Galveston, and in May, about the 10th or 12th, pulls into College Station with the presidential train, actually 3 cars attached to the ING train, to come visit A&M. He got off the train, and there was a massive, they shut everything down. It was the first time a president had ever visited A&M. Wilson had did a speech, I believe, in downtown Bryan, maybe during the campaign, and Tafts, I'm not real sure. But Wilson, the train stopped, they pick him up in a Packard, and they have on the cinder track, they pull into Kyle Field, and there's about 25,000. Everybody in town and Bryan and the county were there, and all the staff and cadets. They go around the field. There's a review. They then have a big lunch over in Sabisa Dining Hall. And then they have a formal review on the drill field. And interestingly enough, his youngest son, Elliot, who he called my little boy, and Elliot is about 6'3". Elliot's on the board of directors. And so he turns to the president and the commandant's a guy named George Moore, who's been brought back to A&M, and said, what are y'all doing to grow this place? And he says, "Well, we're trying to do some facilities." He said, "Well, we need to do something about this. What do you need?" He says, "We need dorms and new mess hall." So he turns to Elliot and says, "Call Jesse Jones, who's running a thing called the RFC, the Reconstruction Finance Corporation in Houston, Texas, and tell them they need money to add dorms so we can increase the enrollment at A&M because we could produce officers, we might need them." Now this is in 1937. Roosevelt knew it was going to hit the fan. The situation was already very bad. More importantly, the country right at that point, that was the Deep Depression. The winter of that year is the worst winter in 25 years. True unemployment really hits about 35 to 40%. It's very shaky. You've got a lot of unrest in the country. You've got a lot of unhappy people. You've got a lot of cross currents of political ideas coming along. And there is a war already starting in Europe that's percolating. Roosevelt will run for office on the promise was, just like Woodrow Wilson did before World War I will keep you out of war. We are not going to war. But clearly, it was happening. Jesse Jones writes a check for $2.1 million, puts it in whatever Federal Express was. They send it up here. They build 16 dorms, which are the core dorms, and Duncan Dining Hall. And that effectively doubles the size of the enrollment A&M and sets forth an ability to produce a lot more officers and potential, officers for a war if it would come along. $2.1 million. If you'll notice in the core area, they're doing renovations now. Each one of those dorms they're renovating, each one of them, there's 12 in the core area, I think is costing about $3 million to renovate. So another gee whiz piece of information, when they got the money and began to build the dorms, they couldn't find any bricklayers. There's a shortage of labor, and you're going, wait a minute, I thought this was depression, there were people. They couldn't, the project was delayed 6 months because they couldn't find people to lay enough bricks to finish the dorms. I don't know what that means, but I always am amazed about some of the stuff. He said, the reason I've stopped here is to thank you for your contribution in World War I. Some 50% of all the living graduates and former students of A&M served in World War I. 50%. So he thanks them, he gets on the train, and he goes away. I gotta tell you one side story. So I go up to Hyde Park, New York, and then one of the greatest things about being able to do all this is to go visit these documents and go to these places. So Sherry, my wife, goes with me, and she wants to go look at quilts and antiques. We get reservations at the Culinary Institute to have dinner that night. So I go over to the library, and I'm asking for the trip file for College Station in May of '37. The guy says, President Roosevelt wasn't there in 1937. We do not have that in our records. I said, he was there. Here's a newspaper article. Here are my files. He wasn't there. I said, can I go into your stacks and look? We don't let people go back there. I said, I'll make you a deal. You let me go back there and I'll find it. And then, you can tell people I didn't go back there, whatever. Well, I go back into the stacks. The boxes are sealed from 1947. They haven't even been opened. But the box with the A&M trip file, and what happened is this is the file by his staff and the Secret Service and the travel and the train schedule and his speech and everything are in one file. It's labeled State College, Pennsylvania. Penn State. It said State College, and whoever was categoric, I just wrote Penn under it. I said, pull that one down right there. He says, I give up. When he gave the speech on Kyle Field, there was a microphone. Elliot's there. He's in braces. And Elliot or one of the Secret Service, and he had his trousers were fixed where he could have an exercise belt because he would hold him up in the back like this, his son would, or the Secret Service. And he could turn around and make sure he didn't tip over. The newspaper account said it was sprinkling there. I opened the box, I pulled out the speech, and there are water drop marks on the speech. You can't make this stuff up. The country is rocking along. A couple of interesting items. All the major players in this, George Moore, who's commandant here, Wainwright, MacArthur, General King, who will be there, they have all passed through the Philippines for at least 25 years, 30 years of their careers. Corregidor, Bataan, the Philippines was a major posting after the Spanish-American War. For instance, the first it's duty assignment that General MacArthur had as a young lieutenant when he left West Point was to the Philippines. Well, it's kind of a rigged deal because his dad, General MacArthur, was the governor head of the island. So I guess he thought he would go there, but he was assigned to a company, and he was assigned to a company to do a survey of the peninsula of Bataan. So he knew about Bataan from 1905, 6, 7. They'd been through there. They had known this. One of the driving forces of this is after the Japanese sunk all the Russian Navy in the early 1900s, there became a major policy shift saying, we know the Japanese are going to do something in the Pacific. So the War College and the Navy and everybody spent years doing plans to get ready to determine what they're going to do to protect the islands and how they would react to this. It's called War Plan Orange. Roosevelt, fast forward back to about the 1940s and 41, they don't know what's going to happen. There are signals that there could be an incident or attack. They really think it's going to be Singapore or the Philippines. It's going to be in that area. No one dreamed, I believe, and I'm pretty sure about this, they dreamed it'd be Pearl Harbor. I mean, the distance that you'd have to go to, the efforts to hit Pearl Harbor, no one dreamed it at all. And obviously, it happens. Well, within hours, about 8 hours of bombing Pearl Harbor, the Japanese bombed Clark Field and all of Manila, which is with the date line, it's December 7th, it's December 8th. It's real confusing, especially in the records. Even the military gets it confused. Phone rings, General Moore gets a call, George Moore. He had been commandant here, and realizing that things were getting a little touchy, he was coastal artillery, that was his expertise. They called him back on duty. I mean, he's already on duty, but send him to the Philippines at Corregidor, a place called Fort Mills on the Rock, to be in charge of all that. Phone rings about 3 or 4 in the morning saying, you know, something's happening in Pearl Harbor. This is not an exercise. And everybody just kind of says, wow. I mean, there seems to be no urgency. They send a scouting planes up and little happens. They come back, scouting planes and other planes that are basically unarmed, by the way. They come back, it's about lunchtime, they park all the planes at Clark Field, wingtip to wingtip. Because somebody had spread the rumor that there might be Japanese spies and saboteurs on the island, so let's get all our planes real close together so they can't get them. Well, that sounded real good at the time. About an hour and a half later, about, I don't know, dozens of Japanese planes were overhead, and they wipe out the entire Pacific Air Force in about an hour. Completely wipe it out, just and that's it. That's it. The few planes that survive, a few new B-17s that have not even been equipped, they tell them fly them to Australia. They bomb the ships, they take the Navy ships and sink them in the harbor there. Their precision is so good. The intelligence report on the Japanese done by the U.S. and British intelligence says those Japanese guys can't fly airplanes. They're too small. They've got bad eyesight. They don't have dexterity. They are not going to work out. Well, little did they know, they had been flying in China for at least 3 or 4 years. Many of them had 100 to 150 missions. They were absolutely precision, first-class pilots, and they proved it both at Pearl Harbor and in Manila. It was not even a match. I mean, we were absolutely overwhelmed. The response is very quick. First of all, basically no one in the United States, other than those that needed to know, were given information about Pearl Harbor. It's hard to say when they really know. There was bond salesmen, savings bond salesmen, some people that were there came back and they talked about how many planes they shot down and how they defended the islands, but no one talked about the ships that were sunk and over 2,000 casualties, and definitely they never brought up Bataan. No one knew about Bataan whatsoever. This is a map here, and it's kind of hard to see, but this is a map that the Army published to show how far it is from Hawaii to get to support the Philippines and Bataan. These are bands, 1,000 miles, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 5,000 miles right there, 5,000 miles from Hawaii to Bataan. And what's it to Hawaii from California? A couple thousand, I'm not sure. But anyway, it is a long way. There is, to support this, it's going to be unbelievable. So they wanted to try to give the American public a magnitude. I found this in a number of papers during 1942. They're running this slide, and they're telling people about this. They're telling MacArthur, the Pentagon or the War Department, Marshall, they're telling them help is on the way. Y'all hold out. The plan was for them to basically defend the island, the Isthmus of Bataan. This is where MacArthur, as a young lieutenant, did the surveying. He knew this. This is about 65 or 70 miles by about 25 miles. It's like from here past Hempstead wide. We're talking about a very tight area, except for some geographical anomalies. There's a mountain range that runs down the middle here. This is very rugged coastline here, cliffs and everything. This road here, which is the coast road, the reason it's there, that's the only flat land running through there. And so the orders and the plan were the following. If we're attacked, move all the supplies out of Manila, get everything in here, and we will stand and hold out right here. This picture is from the actual plan. There's the first line of defense. There's the second line of defense. There's the third line of defense. They divided the island in two down the mountain range. There was one command on this side, King and Wainwright on the other side. So basically, the plan seems pretty good. They've got probably 80,000 American troops, and we don't know, 50, 60, 80, 100,000 Filipino troops. The only problem is the Filipino troops have no equipment. They've been practicing with broomsticks, marching. They don't have uniforms. They don't have helmets. They unpacked equipment that had been packed after the Civil War was what was shipped there. And most of it was used in the Spanish-American War, because when they unpacked the equipment, it was wrapped in newspapers dated 1898 and 1899. So you know what, you can always look at the newspapers and you can tell. So if you're looking at antiques and you get an old box, look at the date on the end. If somebody wrapped it up in the 30s, like my aunt had wrapped up all these dishes, well, we knew they came from their depression dishes because they're wrapped in 1932 newspaper. We kept the newspaper and threw the dishes away. They're a lot more valuable. So they're hemmed up here. The first idea is to try to push them out and get them up here and stop them. Right here, there's a junction in which they could have wiped out the whole army right here if we hadn't blown the bridge and got through there. Now, all these planning, I mean, we spent 35 years planning to defend this. Nothing was exercised. Well, they moved, they did stuff, but less than 10%. They left all the supplies in Manila. What they left, they didn't blow up. There was one warehouse full of rice that would fed the men for 6 months, but somebody said, well, it belongs to a Japanese company, and we need to get permission before we commandeer this stuff. And some sergeant standing there said, what are you talking about? They're bombing us and shooting us. Ask them for permission. So they drove away with empty trucks and left all the rice there. They left all the medicine, the ammunition. I mean, it is a debacle. And then they get to this choke point here, coming into the island here, and they put up this line of defense. It is not good. Things are not good. The rations almost immediately go to half rations. It's funny because I keep talking about this, and of course, let me tell you, this is a hot place. I was there 2 years ago on the same time of period in April, and it was 104 or 5 degrees the entire time. There's no moving air. It's very still. It's humid, and no one was shooting at me. I wasn't trying to dodge anything. Dust wasn't blowing. I was in an air-conditioned car, and I was very uncomfortable. This is a very inhospitable situation, and the Japanese army that is sent there, and a general named Homa, had come out of Singapore. They'd come out of China. These were not amateurs. They threw about half of the army in there that was experienced troops to attack. They were aggressive. They were smart. Tactically, they were well supplied. And the most important thing they had was absolutely total control of the air. We had no air support. I think we were trying to fly 3 or 4 planes, and they were just basically trying to shuttle messages and stuff. Meanwhile, MacArthur, who is on Bataan, he's pulled back in here, Wainwright. He finally moves in and goes back to Corregidor in Malanta Tunnel to run the battle from there. Everybody has an opinion about MacArthur. I grew up thinking MacArthur was the greatest thing. One of the earliest books I read was a book called American Caesar by David Habersham. It was written in the 60s. I guess I was a senior in high school about the time. Fabulous book. My dad, we went through the landing at Incheon. I know more about Incheon and mud and landing, and then I got to meet one of the, General Ray Murray years ago. I got to meet him, and he was one of the chief commanders, a colonel at the time, I think. So we always had a high regard, but the mixed report is, it's just what it is. It's mixed. So I'm kind of ambivalent about it, except for the fact that, first of all, they were telling him help was on the way. Second of all, he's saying, you know, when is it going to get here? There was no help on the way. As you can see, no one is going to, there is no way, there is nobody going to come out of Pearl Harbor. If it was on the way, there were no supply ships, there was no landing ships. Big destroyers don't land troops. They stem back and lob in big shells. So there was no capability to do this. These guys are left out to dry, period. And it wasn't gonna work. They defend the island, they move back into they move all the way, they move down, they go to the next line, they come to the next line. Finally, they're trapped. They're really trapped here. These two X's here, there was 2 hospitals there. Now the Japanese start bombing both hospitals. Some of the accounts that are the most unbelievable, when I was doing the book and I'm going through all these accounts, I've got first-person accounts that are fairly grisly and but the accounts by the nurses are the ones that'll just make your hair stand on end of what happened to what they're witnessing and the wounding and the problems that are going on. And one particular was one Jerry and I always wonder about is Juanita Redmond. He might talk about her later on when he does his book here. But there's a lot of real personalities involved with these nurses. They order them to leave. They don't leave. They said, no, we are not leaving. And they stay there to the last minute until they evacuate the island. The island, they will pull MacArthur off. They will then pull Wainwright back, and they will give the command to a man named King, General King, and finally it's all over. Early April, and he will surrender. The largest surrender, I think, since Chancellorsville during the Civil War of a Federal Army, something like that. There was no option. They were totally wiped out. The men, the supplies, it was over with. The next phase is the one that gets all the attention, and well, it should, is the handling of the prisoner of war. There was a document, you've heard of the Nuremberg trials, in which they went through all the documents and did the interviews and the trials. Well, there was a set of trials also in Asia, in Japan, Manila, Singapore. Instead of just having it in one place like Germany at Nuremberg, they had it in 5 or 6 cities in the Pacific. And I kept trying to get these records, and I kept trying, and finally a lady at the library here found them at the University of Amsterdam. So we put in a request, and they sent me the published records, not the originals, but all the testimony and everything of the trials from that period there. And they are grisly about what they're going on and what's happening there. What they find out is clearly the Japanese plan has worked out. They have probably here at the end of the island, the numbers, there is no exact number. The muster rolls get confused. The units are collapsed. When they leave Manila, they take airmen and turn them into, try to make them soldiers. They take Seabees and try to give them rifles. I mean, it is the biggest mess you've ever seen. It is really unbelievable that they're able to hold out that long. They probably have 100,000 here. This is, you can hardly see it, but that's that South Coast Highway there where the Bataan Death March will take place. When I was over there, I left Manila and I went up to there's a lot, these names all run together, but there is a number of prison camps that will be set up here. There's 2, 3 in Manila, there's Tarlac, Cabanatuan. Cabanatuan, if you saw the movie The Raid, where the soldiers go in and liberate the prisoner camp right before the end because they think they're going to kill them all. They were. I had the order, August the 9th, 1944, called Kill All Prisoner Order. Everybody's denied it. I've got a copy in Japanese and English. It really was there. So going into that camp, there were 2 or 3 Aggies there that they pulled out, and they saved about 250 prisoners. The 2 or 3 they lost, I believe, actually died of heart attacks just from exposure as they tried to evacuate them out of there. So here we are. They're hemmed up. Everybody else is pulled back to Corregidor that they could get. There was no way to evacuate the troops off of Bataan. There were no boats, no ships, no anything. I've crossed the water here. It is deep, it is swift, it is choppy. There's no way you're gonna get across there. There's just no way. They send some patrol boats, they pull out the intelligence people, they get the nurses out, they get the doctors out. They try to do the best they can, but they are not going to pull 100,000 troops out on Corregidor. And oh, by the way, Corregidor couldn't handle them anyway. Corregidor already had 2,000 or 3,000 people. They were running short of food and water, and it was going to happen. The Death March will start on about April 8th or 9th, and it will end on Muster Day, April 21st. And it is terrible. It's a combination of things that the soldiers already were totally in terrible health. Malaria, beriberi, dengue fever, you name it, elephantitis. I had to go look up the list of things that these guys had. It is bad. They've had no nourishment, and the Japanese, the deal was they were going to load them in trucks and drive them up here. I have a picture in the book down here where they're marshaling them there with all these cars and trucks parked there. They leave them there and they just begin to march them. One of the most unbelievable passages I find is General Moore on top of Corregidor. This is another cutaway that was done by the Army that was sent to all the newspapers, but this is Corregidor. Bataan is over here. It's shaped like a tadpole. Here's the landing field here. Here's Malanta Tunnel. But right up here on top, they had built an observation post to try to watch for incoming bombers and stuff. Totally exposed, by the way. MacArthur. MacArthur is in the tunnel, but George Moore goes up there with high-powered binoculars, and he could see across the bay. It's only like a mile and a half across here. He could see the marshaling of the troops to march them out of here. They weren't putting them in the trucks. They put the troops, first of all, around the artillery so that we couldn't bomb them. We couldn't shoot shells at them. And then he could see it. And he describes looking at the end of the march when it's leaving there and the impact on it. It would have a major impact on him. They pull back to Corregidor. Now, there's two parts to this. Those that are captured on Bataan, that is the Bataan Death March. That group is the Death March. Those that are left here will hold out about another month on Corregidor. There are about 25 or 26, 27 Aggies that are on Corregidor. The other balance of the 89 are on Bataan. You could get off on a lot of different tangents, but there's a story about the Aggie muster. There is an observation. General Moore calls Tom Dooley, who you'll hear about shortly, I hope, in time. Tom Dooley up. Tom Dooley's class of 35, the head unit leader. He said, Captain Dooley, go out and get me a roster of all the Aggies here for April 21st so we can recognize them on muster day. There was no gathering. They're bombing the island incessantly. They're spread out everywhere. So they did not get together in the tunnel and drink water and break bread. It didn't happen. But the fact that they made this list, the concern they had was protecting their GI, SGLI, Servicemen Group Life Insurance Policy, for $10,000. I think is it still $10,000? That has been forever. And so, it started in World War I. And so they got this list done. They found one of the news reporters from UPI and handed him the list. And he sent a wire out so they could tell their families that at that moment in time they're still alive, but they could prove their existence, et cetera, in case they got killed, the group life insurance. There's a lot of things going on here. Well, this list hits in the U.S., and I mean, it goes viral, is the word they didn't have then, but we have now. It is the front page of the papers. Senator Tom Connally gets up in the Senate and gives a speech in the great tradition of the men of San Jacinto. The Aggies and the Alamo have stood strong and have mustered on Corregidor, and that set into motion this idea that they met, but they didn't really meet. But the idea really captured the imagination of the country. Corregidor will be bombed just unbelievably. They will bomb it. Corregidor as a gun emplacement for artillery was one of the top fortifications in the world until the airplane was invented. They could shoot a projectile the size of a bathtub 23 miles into a trash can. That's how accurate it was. Japanese stayed out 24 miles, sent the airplanes to bomb it. So all these fancy gun emplacements there, and they're massive. They were really nothing more than scrap metal. They only used them one or two times. They could even, when they were set up, they weren't even able to turn them to where they could shoot properly at Bataan because they never thought they'd be shooting at Bataan. They were trying to protect the ocean out here and the bay behind them. So they were useless. The island will surrender. Moore and Tom Dooley, two Aggies, are among the three that will meet at the surrender with Wainwright. And they will be put onto a tennis court right down here by the airport. There's 4 or 5 tennis courts with one water spigot, and put 2,500 guys on 4 tennis courts with one water spigot and no food. And they would sit there for 7, 8, 10 days. They then went through them and tried to find out, were you running electricity? Were you running the waterworks? They wanted to get the utilities going, so they kept about 150 who they thought could run everything. The Japanese will run them. Then they move them in boats across to Manila, and then they move them to the prison camps. They moved, one of the most, other than the first story was the story about Moore seeing the prisoners. These guys are in bad shape also, but they weren't as in bad shape as the ones that did the Bataan Death March. They moved a number of them across in boats into the first camp called Tarlac by the end of April. They moved a lot of the Bataan prisoners over here. The death rate is running at 200 and 300 a day in the camp between Americans and the Filipinos. So the Japanese side, whoo, we got to do something here. So they pull out part of these prisoners here to move over to the camp with part of the Corregidor people. The description that the Corregidor people have of watching these guys from Bataan walk in, it'll make the hair go up on the thing, because here they are, they've got trouble, but here is this sick, wounded group that they're trying to move to protect, and it is not good. The Japanese do nothing to it. The Red Cross cannot get in to inspect the camps. They said they didn't sign the Geneva Convention. They could care less. Packages piled up in warehouses of food, clothing, and everything that we were shipping there, and they were there at the end of the war. They were there. We found them. They didn't even try to burn them. Thousands of pounds of supplies, food, and vitamins and everything. The next phase that will happen, and volumes have been written on this, is as they begin to panic by 43, they said, we've got to move these prisoners off of Bataan and Corregidor. And they had 2 or 3 motives. Number one, to control all these prisoners. Number two, they wanted to move them near production facilities that they had in Japan, China, and Korea to help build parts and to support, their manufacturing, because they'd pulled all their manufacturers out to put them in the army. And number 3 is basically to send a statement. Jim Erickson, who I've come to know real well, and a number of people have done some tremendous research in this area. The big picture is there were about 154, 58 ships that came in, and that is ship months, because one ship might have made 2 or 3 trips, that they would begin to bring in 1944, 43, 44, to move these troops out. They weren't moving them out in 200 or 300. They were putting 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 on a ship. Only one ship, I think, if I've got my facts right, was marked with, this is a prison ship, Red Cross. The Japanese would load the ship up with prisoners, and then many times they would put their soldiers and staff, and towards the end, their families on the ship, and they would sell out. Not only would they sell out of there going to go to Singapore or to Japan or these different locations, they would sail with military convoys. And so here is the U.S. with strength building, with submarines in the area and air power, and they see a convoy coming. The ship is unmarked, and we ended up sinking our own the Japanese ships with prisoners in it, and of course the guys in the air couldn't tell. They didn't know, and it was just absolutely tragic. Thousands upon thousands will die in the hell ships. This picture is kind of hard to see, but they'd come into Manila Bay, they had loaded the ship up, and they were coming out here, and they had turned up here. Well, the Navy intelligence got wind of it, and I know this is hard to see, but let me see if I can describe it. There is the ship there, right there. It's been bombed, it's smoking. What you can't see, that haze in the water, are the little white dots as the ship is blowing up of the prisoners going over the side, and this swim was probably 400 or 500 yards, maybe a little further across here, and so they lose a lot of prisoners here. The Okamaru is the name of the ship, and they will come across here to this point, then they will be held here again and reloaded on another ship. It is over and over again. The accounts of the hell ships are one of the darkest periods of the military history. Finally, nobody in the United States knows anything about this. I don't think I have another slide. No one knows anything about this. The Pearl Harbor is not reviewed until 1943. I guess if you had a family member, I know A&M, the Association of Former Students, E.E. McQuillan, who's the head of it, they're trying to find out. One of the most blistering letters I found in the book through one of the prisoners' families is a letter written by Mrs. Moore. She was at her wit's end. She had gone 3 years without hearing about her husband. She was told to contact the Red Cross. She was told to contact the Army. She was told to contact Geneva. They gave her a total thing, and she writes a blistering letter here about, what are we going to do about this? They didn't know the fate of any of these people until 43. Some letters did go through both ways. You could write. You could only send a 3x5 card out of the prison camp with 25 words on it. I found more than 25, so you chose your 25 words very, very carefully that you're going to send out. They found warehouses of these letters and cards that never came out, and so it didn't happen. Let me wrap up here so I can maybe answer some questions. On the Bataan Death March, there's a lot of great organizations that have tried to preserve this history. They are marked every kilometer with these markers of the march. This is kilometer 14. I was over there with David Evans, and this is where his father was captured, right here beside it. Let me see just how insidious this is. As you come up this road, and I went up it both ways, out of the mountains, there's all these streams. I'm there in April, the hot season, the dry season. There's water and streams running under this road all the way along. There was plenty of water for the prisoners. If you stepped off the road, you were bayoneted. If they came across, they would run over you. There was clearly no planned effort to do any assistance to it. They were held in fields and in warehouses along the way. A half a cup of rice. Coleman, whose quote is on the front, said, "Gosh, I didn't want to go through and sort it out because if I threw away the maggots and the leaves and the rocks and the broken glass, I'd only have a half a cup, so I just ate the whole thing." I mean, these stories are just incredible. And so these 89 Aggies, of which at the end only a third will return. I interviewed 7 of them, and today only one, Colonel Bill Hamilton in Kansas City, is the sole survivor of the 89. It is a dark chapter in our history, unpreparedness, missed opportunities, just a real tragedy as this unfolded. A&M would still not know about this, and literally to 45 or 46. They still have not declassified all the intelligence reports on the debriefs on these guys. I tried to get them. They have not declassified them. They still have them. They're so blistering. And it's very complicated with the Japanese surrender and chemical plants and all type of other things that happen after war where people are trying to cut deals. And so that's it. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a chapter of our A&M history that I hope that people will just not forget. Thank you.